Good evening and welcome to another edition of Today with Dr. Wendy. I'm Wendy Patrick. My co-host Larry Dersham and I have a great show for you tonight, as we always do. And guess what it's going to be about? It has been over a month since the presidential election. It seems hard to believe because we've talked about pretty much nothing else between then and now. But we ask you just briefly to pardon the interruption. Haha, that's going to be the topic we'd like to talk about just briefly. Presidential pardons. And not just any kind of presidential pardons, but preemptive pardons. Now, why is that important and why is that so misunderstood? When you think about clemency, you often think about executive forgiveness, forgiving somebody for something that they've already done, commuting a sentence, somehow righting a wrong in terms of the reasons that presidents give pardons to begin with. But what you've heard discussed over the last couple of days is what we'll call preemptive pardon power. In other words, pardoning somebody for things that occurred in the past that they haven't yet been charged for in the future. It's sort of like if you bump into somebody at Trader Joe's and say, "Pardon me," you don't have to wait to be charged with battery for that to be forgiven. So too, the president has been looking around his social circle, his circle of influence, and deciding whether or not there's somebody who deserves prospective forgiveness. But remember, this is not a warranty. In other words, a pardon doesn't affect future behavior. It only can impact what you've already done in the past. So think about it this way. They protect against potential criminal exposure, not potential crime. Now, having said all of that, why are we talking about the president pardoning family members? This president has the most squeaky clean family that most people could even think of. Here's why they're talking about it. The president isn't worried that his family members have committed a crime. He's worried about potential vindictive prosecution. That is what the Trump administration has been discussing. Now, I know that many of the Republicans are saying, well, gosh, maybe he ought to pardon Joe Biden. After all, Joe Biden's been under investigation for a variety of things over the last couple of years, just like many members of the president's sphere of influence. We're also talking about it because the pardoning of Flynn might have opened the floodgates as to the amount of people that are probably reaching out looking for potentially their own presidential pardons. But that has to be something that the president has to discuss necessarily because all presidents do. In fact, if you looked at the numbers of which presidents pardoned who and how many, the numbers are staggering. This president actually, in the grand scheme of things, has not issued anywhere near the amount of presidential pardons as some of his precedents have done. But, you know, there is nothing that explicitly says you have to just pardon people you know. I mean, remember Jimmy Carter famously pardoned draft dodgers. You had President Clinton pardoned his brother, all in the family. So there's really a very broad spectrum of people that fall under this rule. The one question that people have been asking, that's a fascinating question from a constitutional law standpoint, is can a president pardon himself? But our president said it best. Why would he? He hasn't done anything wrong. Now, if we were to just take this to an academic argument, we would probably say no president has ever tried, so you really don't know. And that would be interesting academically. But instead of talking about things that are probably not going to happen, we're going to sort of turn our attention, Larry, to things that already are. But I'll leave you with this when it comes to the success of potential pardons. One reason that our president might want to test the limits of this, even though there may not have already been a case on point, is that for the very first time in recent years, the Supreme Court stands at a 6-3 conservative majority. Think about this, Larry. Our president has appointed himself 1/3 of the Supreme Court. So as we continue to talk about election lawsuits and all of this, you know, if there ever were a time that the Supreme Court actually would decide to hear an election-related lawsuit, this would be the time. Not only do we have that conservative majority, but we also have one of the most important questions that we could ever have, the election.
Absolutely. Yeah, before I get into the election part of it, Wendy, first of all, I'd like to tell everybody, we all know this. We're living through historical times. I've been, throughout my lifetime, I don't think I've ever seen times in the United States quite like this. And what I'd like to talk about first, if I may, before we get back into the election, is I call it resisting the hypocrisy bureaucracy. So, okay, we know Newsom got caught with his friends in the French Laundry high-end restaurant in Napa, didn't have a mask, wasn't social distancing. He was with a bunch of people. Dianne Feinstein gets caught on camera walking through the airport with her staff, no mask. Nancy Pelosi, we all remember that one, beauty shop without a mask. And how about Chicago Mayor Lightfoot? It goes on, no mask. So it's like two systems of justice. And this latest one in LA County, they just voted to ban not only indoor eating, but outdoor eating. So shortly after making that vote, County Supervisor Sheila Kuehl, you may remember her, this goes so far back, she played Zelda on Dobie Gillis. That's the Sheila Kuehl I'm talking about, got caught in Santa Monica eating at a high-end favorite restaurant of hers just after she voted. They don't. But here's the thing, Wendy. Here's the thing. I think this is, okay, we say, okay, hypocrite. We kind of laugh about it and kind of mentally wag our finger at them or so. But there's a bigger story. And here's the bigger story in my mind. These people are indicating by their actions they're not afraid of the coronavirus. Because, if it were something super serious, they wouldn't be doing that. The real story, in my opinion, is these lockdowns, all the mask mandates, the business closures, the curfews, and not to mention, the social distancing are conditioning us to get used to living under tyranny. I call it, to impose the Great Reset. I know that's controversial to say that, but what else would you think? Why wouldn't they be, if they're that afraid of the virus, why would they be acting that way?
Well, one of the things we have to remember about this, Larry, just to break this up, is I'll play the devil's advocate side of this. There have been many studies that have shown that something like an N95 is very effective against guarding against contracting the virus. The studies are mixed in terms of whether or not masks work. So the narrative seems to be, the dueling narratives seem to be the following. You have people that certainly do not appreciate the infringement on liberty because it does border on, as you're talking about, some type of social control. And then on the other hand, you have people that genuinely want to stay safe. They want to protect family members that might be compromised or at risk, but they feel like there should be more of a professional liability slash personal responsibility dichotomy. In other words, given the low amount of people that claim to have gotten sick at restaurants, I know coronavirus, who knows where you got it, maybe there are better ways of allowing us to sort of socially police ourselves instead of telling us where we can and can't go. And Larry, one other thing that I'd love to hear your thoughts on is, given all these mandates and the lockdowns and the orders, how do you enforce what law enforcement agencies across the nation have basically said? Look, we're allocating our resources to fighting crime, not making sure people are masked and socially distanced when they're in their own homes.
I 100% agree with those law enforcement officials. I agree with so many of the county sheriffs throughout the land, not only in California, but in other places, saying that's not my job. I'm not going to enforce those laws. We've got the curfew here in California. Governor Newsom is threatening to introduce some more new regulations this weekend. And so I think that we all need to take a page, and this is my opinion, I'm really stepping on the line here. You don't necessarily have to agree with me, nor the station, but I think we need to start reading about Mahatma Gandhi and his peaceful civil disobedience. Or how about Martin Luther King Jr., that wonderful man, his ideas on peaceful civil disobedience. What if they tell you, some outrageous thing, you got to give your firstborn over to the state or something like that? When does it stop? When do we fight back? And they don't give you statistics on how many people are committing suicide. They don't give you statistics on how many people are suffering severe depression who are not going into the family doctors because they can't get in.
Yeah,
I think we need a focus. We need a focused approach, and not this mass, one size fits all. It's wrong.
Yeah, I think it seems like a lot of the pushback the governor is getting. You talked about the hypocrisy. It's also true, however, there's got to be a happy medium in there somewhere, where we do care if we go below 15% of ICU beds, which is partially the reason that the governors, not just of California, but other states, have been talking about a lockdown. But you're correct in that we certainly don't want to have the suicides, the depression, the anxiety, the lack of pro-social resources available to people who are used to going to after-school programs, all the other types of things that young people particularly need at the cost of simply enforcing mandates. There's got to be a happy medium in there somewhere. And, week by week, we continue to think through some of these issues together, and I think we're going to probably get it right eventually. One thing that distinguishes the time we live in now, though, Larry, from March, is that we've learned more about the virus now that it shouldn't justify another lockdown. And that has people very frustrated, is we've come way too far to backslide into rules and regulations that might have been appropriate pre-COVID protocol, but certainly aren't appropriate now.
Vaccines around the corner.
Vaccines around the corner. So we have a very special guest for you on the other side of the break. Very special in terms of a very feisty advocate for some of the election integrity lawsuits that you're hearing about going on across the country. You do not want to turn that dial, because this is going to be a very exciting second half. So stick with us. You are listening to Today with Dr. Wendy. We are back in a flash. Welcome back to Today with Dr. Wendy. I'm Wendy Patrick. My co-host Larry Dersham and I have a very special guest for you. And he's going to talk about something that continues to be in the headlines because it is just that important. And it has to do with election integrity. Now, thankfully, some of these claims, these allegations that have now been corroborated with many instances across the country, affidavits, surveillance footage, a spike in the middle of the night on November 3rd, I could go on and on, but we finally moved out of the court of public opinion and into a court of law, finally. But it is about more than just merits and math. In other words, it shouldn't just be outcome determinative regarding which lawsuits are pursued, because this is bigger than that. In fact, President Trump said this himself, that it's about more than him at this point. It's about, can we guarantee free and fair elections in America? Should we be able to guarantee that? Shouldn't we care, regardless of whether or not it changes the outcome in any particular state, that legal votes count and illegal votes don't? Here to help us break it down, Larry, who do we have on the line?
Yes, Wendy. Today I'm honored to introduce Dr. Jerome Corsi. Dr. Corsi received his PhD in political science from Harvard University. He resides with his family in New Jersey. He's been a frequent guest on so many radio stations and television stations, I can't name them all, but one, for example, Fox News, Fox Business, CNN, MSNBC, and so forth. Dr. Corsi is a best-selling author and has written 25 books since 2004, including 6 on the New York Times bestseller list, 2 of which reached #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Dr. Corsi is also the founder and CEO of CorsiNation.com. It's a great site. You should all check that out. Welcome to the program, Dr. Corsi.
Dr. Corsi, you've become quite a household name in many political circles, and that's partially because of the passionate work you continue to do in this area. And we are just thrilled to have you on the show and wondering, we know a little bit of the answer to this because we've followed your website, but looks like you are an active participant, so to speak, in some of this post-election, these battles in pursuit of maintaining some kind of election integrity. What's the latest?
Now, if the House picks the president, they're controlled, aren't they, Dr. Corsi, by the Democrats? Will that work out okay for Trump? Or I know there's strong support in the House, but doesn't the don't the Democrats have the control of that? How will that work out? Good.
Yeah,
Oh, that's good to hear.
one of the most interesting things about that recitation, Dr. Corsi, I think that's fascinating, and hardly anybody knows that. That's why I'm glad you're spelling this out, because all people really know is they're looking at separate instances of alleged fraud in different states and lawsuits being filed and either dismissed or courts not ruling, not at all considering the bigger picture as to what would be the easiest, smoothest, fastest path. Operation Warp Speed for Donald Trump more than the vaccine to get to the Supreme Court. Out of all of the different types of lawsuits, certainly nowhere near one size fits all, given what's been filed in different states, what do you think is the best chance that the president has in getting the case that he needs to get in front of the Supreme Court? I know you've sent them your ebook, and you know what, Dr. Corsi, I'll bet they're going to read it. What do you think is the best path for one of these lawsuits to get there? Oh, that's great.
All
That's
right.
great. All right. Yeah.
Yes.
Hmm. Yeah, no, Dr. Corsi, that's great stuff. We want to thank you so much for joining us. And your website is corsination.com. And boy, is that just packed full of interesting, well, I'm going to say fascinating information.
It is.
Larry and I have both checked it out and watched some of your videos. And your books sound very provocative as well. So you are really doing some passionate work there. Thank you so much for joining the show. And thank you to
Thank you,
Thank
Doctor.
you. And thank you to our listeners. Have a wonderful, safe weekend. And please join us next week for more of Today with Dr. Wendy. Headlines with a silver lining. Have a great week. God bless you.